In the Amazon region of Argentina, the Iguazu Falls are one of the world's most impressive sights. An exceptional variety of ecosystems characterize each of the 22 provinces of this huge country. In the Misiones region, for example, we find the last patches of an ancient forest. In the Corrientes province, the Ibera wetlands are as ecologically precious as the Pantanal, the famous park in Brazil. In Argentina, plants and animals may be classified as natural monuments. Environmental protection began here almost a century ago with the first national park in Patagonia in 1922, thanks to land given to the state by the explorer and naturalist Francisco Moreno. Ever since, more than 3.5 million hectares have been protected throughout the country, containing a great many emblematic species. In the parks of Iguazu and Puerto Peninsula of the Misiones province, scientists are studying an animal classified as a natural and national monument, the jaguar. In the Cruce Caballero Park, biologists, in order to protect the most vulnerable bird species, are studying birds that nest in the holes of trees. Among them is an Amazonian parrot, the venacious-breasted Amazon. In the Ibera wetlands, nature protection goes beyond conservation. The most vulnerable endangered animals have been reintroduced into nature, like the giant aardvark and the pampas deer. In the arid mountains of the Córdoba province, there is a unique refuge enabling howler monkeys, the primary victim of illegal trade in Argentina, to be rehabilitated. Not very far from the Iguazu Falls in the Puerto Peninsula Park, a group of scientists direct all their attention to one of the world's most noble predators, the jaguar. Its disappearance was endangering the ecosystem of the Great Atlantic Forest. Every day, Pablo and Lucia make the rounds of the park to check on the traps they've set up and to activate them at night. Their goal is to capture several jaguars in order to equip them with electronic collars.
Here we see a trap that we've set up on this passage because the animals, especially the felines, use this path to move around. We put branches down so that they'll only pass through here. The lasso is activated when the trigger and the cable are like this. When an animal steps down here, it activates the trigger and its paw is caught in the trap. There's always a space for the blood to circulate. The paw is not cut. On the other hand, under the lasso, there's a fairly thick layer of spongy rubber so that when a less heavy animal passes by, the trap is not activated. Actually, we attach a nylon thread to the lasso, which is attached to a magnet. This allows us to deactivate the electronic collar, which we put higher up in order to be able to control it from home. Should I put it on? This is the magnet that deactivates the collar. We put it here to deactivate it. When an animal is caught, it pulls the line and makes the magnet come out. The activated collar transmits a sound that we can hear from home or when we're on guard duty.
There are about 10 traps spread throughout the 6,700-hectare park. Others have been set in the Iguazu National Park. Deforestation is threatening the jaguar's survival. There are barely 200 individuals left in Argentina. To better protect them, it's essential to know where and how they live, which is why several specimens have to be captured and then followed.
On the path, we also use fish as bait, since the odor attracts the animals here. We put a little up above so that the jaguar will lift its head when he gets close to the lasso. If the trigger is activated, it won't get trapped by the head. So, putting a little bait up higher is for the animal's protection. So to attract it, there's the fish, and we also have a playback device. If the sound device doesn't function when the animal passes by, we still want to attract its attention, which is why we use the fish. Here's the playback system. It's a device that reproduces a sound. In this case, it's the sound of a young deer calling its mother. It lasts for 3 minutes, and then there's 5 minutes of silence. It works with a memory card, which contains the soundtrack. Last year, we captured an animal we called guacurari. It weighed 70 kilograms, and the body, including the tail, measured 2 meters 20.
The captured animal was named after a famous warrior chief, well known for his exploits in the struggle against the Portuguese 200 years ago.
As a veterinarian, my role is that of an assistant. We control the physiological parameters of the animal so that it will remain stable during the anesthesia. Then we begin taking samples. We take blood samples to obtain serum in order to determine the different diseases the animal might have picked up. We also collect ectoparasites, take genetic samples, and, if possible, fecal matter. Other biologists working here measure the length of the animal, its tail, its members, and its paws.
After changing the batteries, they put the collar back on the jaguar they already captured the previous year. Still under the effect of the anesthetic, guacurari leaves, staggering but free. Agustin is the head scientist of the Jaguar Preservation Project. He comes to join the team and will try to localize guacurari, the only feline equipped with a transmitting collar.
He's pretty far away. Definitely inside the park, in this direction. We discovered that this male needs more than 30,000 hectares to live. This is vital information because if you think that each individual needs such a large territory, then we've got to have lots more forest space in order to retain a viable population. We estimate the present population at about 50 individuals, which means that in this region, the species is really endangered. There are really very, very few individuals. We use photo traps, which enable us firstly to have pictures of the animals, and secondly, to give us an idea of the number of jaguars in the region being studied.
Y así conocer la abundancia del jaguar en una región determinada.
In Argentina, the jaguar is considered a natural and national monument because It's a very charismatic species,
Extinción en nuestro país, ciertamente.
and because it's definitely an endangered species in our country, and because it plays a major role in the ecosystem in which it lives.
Con sus crías, no es que falte la reproducción.
We have photos taken with camera traps of females with their young. Reproduction is not an issue. The jaguars reproduce naturally, but they're decimated by hunters, which makes it hard to restore the original numbers. They're not even hunted for their fur or because they attack cattle. The main reason is the hunter's desire to bring home a trophy. The jaguar is a large predator. It can feed itself on a rat, a lizard, or even a tapir, which is the biggest animal here in the jungle. But what it consumes the most and what it actively looks for are peccaries. That's its favorite prey in the region.
Only a handful of people are trying to save the species. There are laws to protect the jaguar, but they're not well enforced. Nevertheless, Agustin remains confident.
I'm optimistic. I think we'll succeed in saving the jaguar population. The fact that we can't observe them easily, in addition to their strength, their power, and their hunting ability, are all elements that continue to surround the jaguar in a halo of mystery. And it's for all these qualities that, for me, make it one of the most wonderful animals on Earth.
Que la especie sea realmente, para mí, uno de los animales más hermosos que hay en la Tierra, ¿no?
The more scientists learn about the needs of the jaguar in terms of habitat and way of life, the better it will be protected in this region of Argentina where half of the original forests are still intact. The Cruce Caballero Park in the southern part of the Misiones province is famous for its great variety of birds. Of the region's 500 species, 312 have been inventoried in the park. This task was carried out by a couple, both scientists, who have worked here since 2003. Their goal is to study and protect the most endangered species, especially those that make their nests in the holes of trees. Cristina and Alejandro inspect the holes they've already listed in order to find the answers to a number of questions.
There are two males and one female. They're doing a strange thing. They go towards the entrance. They reach the entrance to the hole. You see them over there?
Yes, it's a white-throated wood creeper.
In the Misiones province, there are about 90 species that use the holes and which are dependent on them. They can't create them themselves. Some can, but the majority of the species are unable to. You'd need a woodpecker or a bird carpenter or a natural hole-producing process.
Un proceso natural se pueda generar un hueco.
We wanted to understand how the animals that use cavities interact with one another around this resource of tree cavities and whether there's competition for these cavities, and then to compare this with between the primary forest and areas that have been more degraded so that we could make recommendations for improving those degraded sites.
Ahí más o menos.
Go down a bit.
Bájale un poco.
If the nest is below 15 meters, we use the pole-mounted camera.
Ahí. Ahí está.
Great, there are 2 eggs inside.
2 huevos, mira.
Ah, buenísimo.
Las aves necesitan huecos de cierta calidad, de ciertas
The birds need quality holes with certain characteristics. They need to be deep with small entrances.
Cuanto más profundos,
the deeper the hole, the better, since it prevents predation by other birds or by snakes. If the access is difficult, that's even better.
Entonces es mejor con un bosque con buenos
A
huecos,
forest
con buena
with
calidad
good
de huecos,
quality holes
hay muchas más
has a greater
posibilidades
chance
de
of having a large quantity of
parque
nests.
que es el último
This park
relicto,
is
el
the
último lugar
last
donde
one
quedan
to contain 600
600
hectares of
hectáreas de
intact
bosque
virgin forest.
virgen, bosque
The conservation
intacto, ¿no?
projects
Las
consist
pautas de
of,
conservación serían
for example,
saber,
comparing the number of holes in this
por ejemplo,
forest
cuántos
to
huecos
that
más
of a
hay en este
forest
bosque
where the
que en un
oldest
bosque donde
trees
se sacan
are
los
cut
árboles más
down,
viejos, que justamente
the
son
trees
los
with the
árboles
greatest
con más
number of
cantidad de
holes.
huecos.
Questions that we're looking at is what are the species of fungus that decay the wood that allows the birds to excavate their cavities. And often on dead trees that are excavated by a bird, we find these fungi in the family of Polyporaceae. Last time we checked, it had already laid 3 eggs. So we'll check it again and see if the 3 eggs are still there, if it's been depredated. Ahí están los 3 huevos.
Qué bueno, ¿no?
Estamos estudiando muchas especies, ¿no? Estamos
We study
estudiando
lots of species, but our greatest interest is in those which are endangered on a national or an international level.
They're especially interested in one species of parrot, the venacious-breasted Amazon, which is critically endangered in Argentina with only 250 individuals remaining.
En este parque tenemos loros, pero tenemos
In this park there
de
are
toda la
parrots,
población
but
muy
very
poquitos.
few in
Tenemos
comparison to
quizás
the
en el
existing
parque nunca
population.
encontramos más de 10,
We never
12,
see more than 10, 12 or
14.
14.
En esta época están
At the moment they're nesting.
Alejandro continues his visit along with Juan, a precious assistant when it comes to checking on what's happening in the holes that are more than 15 meters high.
Estamos debajo de un árbol.
We're at the foot of a garapa tree.
Vimos un loro.
We spotted a parrot near a hole,
Probablemente que
and it's possible that his nest is
cerca del hueco,
inside.
hay un hueco y creemos que puede haber un nido. Bueno. Listo. Qué lindo, siempre me gustó esta parte de lianas. Ahí. Dale, metelo más. Ahí está el pichón. Ese es el pichón.
Go in further.
Un solo pichón. Y veo
That's a
uno
small
solo.
one.
Me parece que hay 2, pero veo uno.
Just one? I only see one, but it seems to me there are 2. It's moving. You see it?
¿Eh?
Christina continues her work on the venacious-breasted Amazon.
We were concerned about the conservation of vinaceous parrots, which is one of the species that's endangered that's here in the park and in the surrounding area. If they don't find a cavity in a tree, then they can't reproduce, they can't have children. So in a sense, their populations can be limited by the number of tree cavities available. And some birds can make their own tree cavity, like woodpeckers, but most birds can't. A woodpecker can make a cavity in a couple of weeks, but for a natural cavity to form, it takes years and years, and they tend to occur in much larger trees.
El problema con los loros es que
The
justamente
problem
si
with
una
parrots is
población
that if
cae
their
debajo
population
de
drops below a
umbral,
certain level, it's hard to
no se
recover their
recupera
numbers.
tan fácilmente.
It's
Todavía es una
possible, though,
población
today
que
to
es
do
muy
so
probable que
only
se
if
pueda
concrete action is
recuperar,
taken.
si se toman acciones
These parrots
concretas,
can be saved if we
de
help
alguna
them
manera se ayuda
by
y
carrying out some of the
se
activities
conservan,
we've
¿no?
suggested, for
Realmente
example.
se toman acciones que nosotros hemos recomendado, por ejemplo. Por fin acero.
Encouraging people not to keep parrots as pets and conserving old trees where birds can nest in the holes are among some of the actions proposed. ornithologists come to the park regularly to do research. Martan, from Holland, is interested in woodpeckers, and especially the very rare helmeted woodpecker.
So that very rotten tree over there, that's a tree where Alejandro had a foraging helmeted woodpecker a week ago. And since it's a tree that has a lot of foraging sign, we think the bird might come back. So I put my blind here and I'm going to sit inside it all morning, hoping that the helmeted woodpecker will show up again to look for more food in the same dead tree. Most woodpeckers are very loud and they call a lot, and when they forage they make a lot of noise, so they're quite easy to find. But the helmeted woodpecker is a really difficult bird to find. We think in the entire Cruce Caballero Reserve there's probably only 2 or 3 pairs at the very most of helmeted woodpecker, and globally there may be maybe as few as between 400 and 1,500 between Paraguay and Argentina and Brazil. So it's one of the rarest woodpeckers in the world, and it's an endangered species. And a helmeted woodpecker seems to be a species that specializes on these trees that are long dead, that are very soft and falling apart, and they dig in this really rotten wood and looking for insects and insect larvae. That's which is their main food source. There's some insects here in the wood. It's a beetle larvae that is. The reason that we focus our research on the helmeted woodpecker is one, that is rare and endangered species that needs help to find out what it needs and how we can restore its populations. But also it is really specialist on old-growth forest, of which there are very few strong examples in the Atlantic forest. And by focusing on the helmeted woodpecker, we can get these ideas on how to restore forests for it that were formerly cut and now coming under conservation management.
Through their research, Marchan, Cristina, and Alejandro show how an ecosystem can be destabilized by the interaction between different species. If one is threatened or disappears, it places all the others with which it associates in danger. In the province of Corrientes in northeastern Argentina, Los Esteros del Ibera, which in the Guarani language means gleaming water, consists of prairies, lagoons, and vast wetland plains, stretching over 13,000 square meters and containing more than 4,000 plant and animal species. These lands, containing one of the world's largest freshwater reserves and which were used in the past for animal breeding and agriculture, have gradually recovered their original fauna and landscapes. Most of this land is privately owned. Among them, an American benefactor, Douglas Tompkins, has purchased through his Conservation Land Trust organization a great many old haciendas. The Rincón de Socorro Reserve now provides 150,000 hectares dedicated to conserving the biodiversity. Restoration began in 1996. Sophia, a biologist in charge of scientific projects, participated in this great ecological adventure.
The primary task was to get the cattle off the land so that the prairie could begin to develop natural vegetation on this land that is prone to flooding. Like the Argentine pampas, these prairies in the Ibera ecosystem are partially protected. This is what makes this site so valuable, in addition to being a humid area with lots of animals. So the work of the Conservation Land Trust was to restore the original splendor of this land and to try to bring back the species which had disappeared. According to published data, there were less than 1,000 wetlands deer on a 1,300,000 hectare area. In the 1970s, the pressure of hunting to respond to the demand for animal skins decimated the capybara's populations. The same was true for the crocodiles and caimans, whose numbers dropped alarmingly. Large colonies of herons were killed for their feathers. And so all of the fauna is still present, but in very small quantities compared to what travelers here in the 50s and 60s had described.
O antes 50, decían las crónicas de viajeros.
Karina is in charge of the reintroduction programs.
We're going to look for 2 young aardvarks, or anteaters, which are near here in the pre-release enclosure. Osi is over there. That's great, Evaristo. This one's a young male named Evaristo. He's about 9 months old and is part of the project for the reintroduction of anteaters in the Corrientes region. Hunters had killed his mother, and they've made him kind of a mascot. These 2 aardvarks here, Evaristo on this side and Osi on the other, are the same age. They'll spend 2 weeks in this enclosure in order to get used to the terrain and to eat this special mixture every day. We gradually lower the food content, and we stop it completely when we see that their diet consists totally of ants and termites. They're young now, but as adults, their tongues can be this long.
Evaristo has been fitted out with a harness which keeps his transmitter collar in place, since it could slide down his snout. He'll wear the collar until he establishes his own territory in the part of the reserve where he'll be released. The release of the first aardvark in the Rincón del Socorro Reserve took place in March 2007. The species had completely disappeared in the province. On the international level, this release is a first, since no other aardvark had ever been reintroduced into the wild. Ibori Pora, which means pretty flower in Guarani, was 2 years old at the time. She came from a neighboring region where a couple had taken her in and treated her since she was wounded.
We've already released 16 aardvarks into the Ibero Reserve, of which 10 have transmitter collars. Very few studies of the aardvark have been made, and so with this reintroduction project, we're dealing with unknown territory. As far as we know, no one has ever released an aardvark back into nature. They're animals that live primarily alone. They come together at the time of mating, but otherwise, they're really loners. I came here to observe this nest of ants and to see if one of the aardvarks had passed by. When they do come, they use their claws, which are long and very sharp. They break up the anthill, and when the ants appear, they suck them up with their large tongue. At a given moment, the soldier ants which defend the nest come out and sting the aardvark's tongue, forcing the predator to leave and not allowing it to totally destroy the ant colony. So nature-wise, all this functions very well. Another interesting thing is that the mother carries her little one on her shoulder. She does so for 8 months after birth, even though the youngster is already large and heavy. Of course, it comes down to be nursed, but as soon as the mother gets up to leave, the little one climbs onto the shoulder, like someone mounting a horse, and hangs onto her until the mother stops walking. Female aardvarks have 1 infant a year after a 6-month gestation period. There are 3 different ways to use these cameras. We put a mixture of the food aardvarks like next to it. When they come by, they eat the food and then continue walking. So on these photos, we can see if they have youngsters, if they travel as a couple, or if they're alone, and in which zone they're located. This is one of our methods. The second method, which we use when we want to inventory the fauna in general, is placing, instead of the aardvark mixture, a can of tuna fish, which has a strong smell, thus attracting all kinds of animals: capybaras, deer, pumas, aardvarks, and sometimes even foxes pass by. And in this way, we can make an estimate of the population of any animal. The last method consists of not setting any bait, but simply observing the animals that come by naturally, without, of course, attracting their attention.
More than 300 bird species can be observed in the Esteros de Zibera. For thousands of years, jacanas have been coming here to reproduce. The role of the males has remained unchanged. It's they who sit on the eggs. A family of camichis, or horned screamers, are happiest in wetland zones and shallow lagoons. On the alert for the slightest dangers, they emit a powerful scream which can be heard 2 kilometers away and which warns other animals to flee. This conservation area provides a unique opportunity for releasing all the species which had become extinct locally. The pampas deer, for example, is now existent in the prairies. At the same time, other reinsertion operations in the ecosystem are being carried out elsewhere.
All of this work has been carried out during the past 4 or 5 years. And at the same time, we've released the aardvark and the pampas deer into nature. Our goal now is to bring back the jaguar. This would be a sign that we've completely restored the ecosystem. In any ecosystem, when one of the great predators is missing, the general health of the environment suffers. There are many infections and diseases. The predator eliminates the most diseased species, since they are the easiest prey. They therefore maintain the good health of an area, which is why the presence of predators is vital to an ecosystem. We hope, after all these years of work, to leave to posterity a 700,000-hectare national park, making it the largest national park in Argentina. If the decision to create a national park is made, we will hand everything over and leave.
The same ecological group carried out the same operation, giving Argentina the 70,000 hectares purchased in Patagonia. After restoration, the area was returned to nature and in 2004 became the Montera León National Park.
What we're also hoping to do is to develop the local economy through ecotourism so that Iberá becomes a tourist destination known throughout the world, like the Iguazu Falls. I feel that for our children and for generations to come, visiting a bucolic site like this is very rewarding. It's a relaxing atmosphere that can remove the stress of work and everyday life. We all need rustic areas to recover our internal harmony. And that's not only true for scientists. Society in general needs these countrified areas for its spiritual well-being.
If the Iberá wetlands does become a national park, it will represent, with a provincial reserve, 7,000 square kilometers of wild space with an exceptional ecological wealth. However, what is sometimes given to nature is unfortunately often taken away. This surface is the equivalent of the land lost each year in the Amazon as a result of deforestation. 800 kilometers northeast of Buenos Aires, in the dry sierras of the Córdoba province, where cows, sheep, and llamas peacefully graze, an endangered species which usually lives in the jungle has found a place to be protected and cared for. This last chance refuge, created 20 years ago, is the first and only center of its kind in Argentina. Every morning, the howler monkeys wake up the entire center to the sound of their screeching concert. Monkeys are the first victims of illegal fauna trade in Argentina. Those that arrive here learn to live in freedom and become monkeys once again. The majority have never lived with their peers and have never climbed a tree. Alejandra Juarez, the instigator of this rehabilitation project, is devoting her life to safeguarding the species.
In this center, the system we use revolves around freedom, which is unusual for a rehabilitation center. The fact that they live their lives here in the most natural environment possible has enabled them to reproduce. We're up to our third generation of offspring.
This represents a rousing success. One female has even given birth to 2 youngsters, bearing witness to the excellent living conditions. This exemplary work was hailed by the renowned primatologist Jane Goodall during her visit here in 2009.
This Center for Protection, Rehabilitation, and Conservation of Argentine Primates has been in operation for 20 years. It tries to provide a solution to a serious problem for howler monkeys that have become mascots or pets. It was and still is illegal, but the traffic existed and still exists today. These monkeys, which people buy, were captured after their mother's death. And when they become large adults, people don't want them anymore. Most of the time they're given to zoos where they become depressed and often die. Their natural defenses are diminished, and they acquire different diseases. But it's above all their psychological needs that cause their death.
The Caraya Refuge for the howler monkey in Guarani stretches over 360 hectares. The owner has turned it over to the association. It's one of the rare outside financing it receives. Most of its revenue comes from donations and visitors' admission fees. Rehabilitation begins in this space, frequented by llamas donated by a breeder who gave up his trade. The monkeys learn to behave as if they were in the wild. Even in captivity, they have the same howl as their wild counterparts.
The Caraya monkey is the largest in South America and in the Southern Hemisphere. Because of one of their unique characteristics, they're also called the most diplomatic monkeys in the world. Thanks to their anatomical structure, which is something like a pocket, their howling resounds and prevents all confrontation. In the morning, they howl to indicate to other groups that they are present.
Indican a otros grupos que ellos están acá.
I'd like to add that because of the volume of sound they emit, Caraya monkeys are also considered to be the noisiest animals in the world, which is why they appear in the Guinness Book of World Records.
If there is any combat, they fight with their powerful screams. Alejandra's team includes 2 salaried workers and volunteers from national and international organizations like Projects Abroad, all of whom are responsible for the 60 borders and the upkeep of the reserve.
The monkeys that arrive here are generally very humanized, with very human traits. The newcomer begins with an adaptation stage, during which we remain in close contact with it until we find another Caraya monkey similar in character so that they can become friends. The newcomer has to have an example to which it can refer and emulate. From that point on, there is a stage of socializing and recognition of its own species. This takes some time, and if all goes well, this socializing will end with the training of a group that can be released at a later date. As far as babies that come here, mainly orphans whose mothers have been killed, we have a nursery where we keep the youngsters with one person in charge of them.
The baby howlers are housed in small outbuildings, sheltered from the wind and the cold. Once spring arrives, they can sunbathe in the arms of their nanny, Pia, a young biology student who comes here during her school vacations and provides the tender, loving care of a surrogate mother.
None of the babies here can be with their mothers, either because they were hunted when they were infants or because they were born on the reserve. Whatever the reason, their mothers cannot care for them. In the artificial breeding zone, our work consists of raising them to become independent and to enter into relationships with larger and more powerful monkeys and to eventually be released.
Something seems to intrigue this monkey. There's some agitation in the rehabilitation area.
Vamos.
You got him?
Vamos, chica. ¿Ya está?
Voy a abrir la puerta.
Sí, sí. Síganos. Ustedes sigan su cierre de puerta.
We're taking them out of the socializing zone and transferring them to the pre-release zone. It'll take a little time, usually 1 or 2 weeks for them to get used to this area. Then we'll begin the work of freeing them.
The dry landscape has some small forest areas scattered around. These jewels of greenery provide shelter for different kinds of monkey families living in freedom.
There are 4 here, 2 males, 1 adult and 1 youngster, and 2 females, mother and daughter. Together they form a family. Now that the acclimatization cage has been installed in the new space, we're going to release them from the inside. They'll stay there for 1, 2, or 3 days because it's become a fairly solid group. Afterwards, they'll be freed and let loose in their sector.
Caraya monkeys play an important part in the environment. Biologists refer to them as guardian monkeys or health guardians, since they're the first animals to be affected by viruses and parasitic diseases. They are therefore key indicators of the state of an ecosystem.
One characteristic of the Karaya monkey helps us to set up this type of rehabilitation. They actually occupy a very small territory, and more importantly, they only travel a few meters a day. So this helps us in the sense that we can release them and form groups within this sector, or even release them in an area which is not their place of origin. We do this to determine the best type of management and maintenance.
The vegetation in the Córdoba province doesn't correspond to the howler monkey's natural habitat. These primates live in tropical forests, where their diet consists primarily of leaves and fruit. Since these leaves are available everywhere, contrary to the fruit, they have less reason to move around.
A comer, camisón, vamos. Gustavo, Gala, Dala, vamos chicos. A comer, camisón, vamos.
This is a group that lives in a pine forest where there isn't enough of a variety of leaves for the animals to feed on. We therefore bring the leaves they need to complete their diets. Camisón is the dominant male. He captures and steals females from different groups to form his own group. It makes you feel good to see them like this because when they arrive, they've been mistreated and they're undernourished. I've followed them since they first came here. I've seen monkeys who came here and are afraid of the other monkeys because they've never seen one before. But little by little, they mingle with the others and form their own groups. Then they're released, create a family, and have babies. So it's gratifying to know that they return to the nature from which they never should have left. People should not snatch them away when they're young or do them any harm.
It's so satisfying to see them develop and to climb, since very often they arrive without knowing how to climb up a tree. They don't know how, and they're not physically prepared, nor are their muscles sufficiently developed for it. And after a while, when you see them climbing trees and developing a sort of dynamism, it's enormously gratifying.
Juan Pablo heads for the most remote part of the reserve, an oasis with old indigenous elms and acacias, contrary to the pine trees planted for commercial reasons that one finds throughout the region.
This is Group 4, a group that lives in an almost totally wild state. We give them a supplement of food because it's a good opportunity to check on them and make sure that everything's okay and whether the group is still complete. However, they don't need the food supplement we give them. The leaves, buds, and fruit in this zone are enough for them to subsist without human intervention. They could easily return to their natural habitat.
I can say today that many of the groups are ready to return to nature. From a psychological, physical, and emotional point of view, they're totally rehabilitated.
The monkeys cannot be released into their natural environment because they're still the object of illegal traffic. There are nevertheless some interesting possibilities.
There are lots of private reserves, protected sites that don't have any karayas. We're also considering releasing groups in Guarani Indian territory, which would probably be justifiable. The word Karaya in Guarani means chief of the forest.
Alejandra's work and her know-how are recognized by the most eminent primatologists. In 2011, her Cumbra refuge was rewarded by APE, an International Primatologist Association. In these regions in the north of Argentina, where certain species are especially vulnerable, scientists have established conservation and reintroduction programs. Their efforts, however, will not be rewarded if laws for the protection of nature are not applied, such as combating trade, creating green corridors to compensate for the fragmentation of biotopes. In this way, animals like the giant aardvark, the jaguar, rare birds, and the howler monkey can once again live and thrive in the forests of northern Argentina.